Welcome to the Southwood Podcast, where we support the mission of Southwood Bible Church to teach the Word, strengthen the body, and defend the faith. Through engaging conversations, our goal is to equip and encourage our members in the Christian life. So we're going to talk about, we're doing question and answer. So our design for this podcast is for Southwood members and anyone else who's listening in to submit questions and we can field them. And so the idea behind it is we're going to kind of think through.
No, serious.
Yeah, we will. Think through how to answer these questions, dealing with issues that everybody is dealing with on a daily basis. So we have an email account. It's it's podcast@southwoodbiblechurch.com. So that's our email account. Send your questions into there and we will deal with them. So right now for this first introductory one, the questions are all dealing with the future of the church. So the first question is, what do you think churches will look like in 2050?
Now, we're still being general or we're being specific to our kind of churches? How
do you want to take it?
That's an interesting question. What will church be like in 50? You want to field the first? We're all fielding these. You're asking them, but we're all okay.
So in 2050, I mean, the biggest question that comes to mind for me is, what are the pulpits going to be like in 2050?
That's interesting.
Because we've seen a shift away from the classic seminary approach, right? Where seminaries are producing pastors. They're producing younger pastors who are going and filling churches. So that'd be my first thing is I have no idea what the pulpits will look like in 2050.
Are you talking about the physical pulpit of where I set my Bible?
Oh yeah, exactly. No.
It'll be glass. It'll be just glass.
It'll be like a hologram or whatever. No, but who will be filling the pulpits? I'm not sure. The church.
Well, that's even changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, sir, I'm really, in retrospect, that dimension has changed immensely in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So go 25 years in the future.
I don't know. I think that that will be a need, is who are going to fill these pulpits. I don't know.
I mean, you got to think we're going to be dealing with 95-year-old Pastor Eric.
No.
So,
that'll be for those of you that care, I'll be 93 at that point. If I'm here, pushing up Daisy somewhere else. But to your question, seriously, and it scares me the thought where church in general will be. In specific, we at Southwood have kind of been around for a while and still kept pretty much the same profile. I guess it would be the way to address it, which is good because that's what we do. But in those 55 years we've been a church, we've seen a tremendous change in churchianity. We're going back to that thing. So another 25 years, I just think it's going to be just horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, in church in general, can we at Southwood keep what we're doing? That's a good question too, because we gotta have not only the leadership to keep propelled in the same direction, keep the vision that we want. At the same time, we've got to have people buy, and it sounds terrible, like it's real estate, buy into it to keep it running, because a church doesn't function if somebody's not supporting it. And we're not only talking monetarily, we're talking about showing up, because it's really hard to have a church of empty seats.
Yeah. So, when we narrow the scope down to more of the conservative Bible churches, just across the U.S., a ton of churches are dying. Right. The majority of these churches are led by guys that are boomers. That generation is the primary leader, the primary pastor in a lot of these churches. There's exceptions to that.
Very few.
But there's a gap really between like Mike and I, between that 30 years and the 65 plus. There's a gap in there. There's not a lot of pastors in that age range who are serving in primary leadership capacity
and
at church.
And to speaking to that, thanks that he's here, and you're here too. Don't take that wrong.
And we
all
got you
showed
over
up.
here.
There's no training. There's no model that somebody's raising it. So we've got a lot of 80-year-olds. I mean, they're seriously, you can go to the Schaefer conference, whatever, and a lot of those guys are 70s, 80s. And then you ask, who's going to follow in your footsteps? And they don't have an answer. Now, should we leave it up to God? Yeah, sure. But at the same time, our process is to train up, be Paul's to Timothy and Timothy to other Timothy.
Yeah, when you look at that model that Paul gave Timothy, I think there's some deliberate leadership development that's in that. And so, but what you mentioned is a common thing of, well, God has always provided for us, so we'll just trust that he will provide that. Sure, I understand where that's going, but is that a responsible way to lead and develop your church?
Yeah.
Or,
there's an outcome that we've seen recently, like we went down and visited the Bible Church of Bartlesville, right? And so, yeah, since we're on the vein of like calling direct things out, like from the last episode we did, but in all honesty, it's something that we should address, because the model kind of there was a pastor that has led that church for a long time, and there wasn't a lot of succession planning and focus on who's going to take that spot, who is going to lead the congregation into the future. And as such, the pastor is, starting to think about that now, but now we're a couple of years out from that time being over. And so there's no one prepared. And so now the church is in conversations of, what are we going to do with our building? What are we going to do with our funding? And is it going to survive? And I think that where they're at is at kind of a crossroads. And that's something that, as you alluded to, that we're seeing more and more. So I've been thinking a little bit more about what will it look like. And I think that with there are some issues that are with the Bible churches now that will be probably in the future as well. You're always going to have your doctrinal issues. You're always going to have, holding to the word of truth issues. But more than that, though, as we move forward into the future, there are other movements happening in the United States. I don't know if we want to go like church at large, but let's constrain it to like the U.S., right? There are other movements that are bidding for the minds of individuals, and they're successful movements. They're very prominent today. And so what I see is, if the church is not responding to those things, then those other movements might win out in the end too. So we'll see churches like ours continue to become less and less frequent in the way that they're established, and these other movements will become more and more prominent.
So what I'm hearing is churches are going to be less conservative, more seeker sensitive, and finding pastors is going to become increasingly difficult.
Yeah. I think that the institutions that have produced good pastors in the past are not, we look at them today, right? Like Dallas Theological and things like that. And places like Tyndale and Schaefer are offshoots of that, to really get back to the roots of doctrine to produce good teachers. And that was a response to these big institutions that used to fill a lot of pulpits kind of, going to the wayside. And so that's only probably going to get worse.
Okay. That transitions perfectly into the next question. Where are future pastors mostly being trained? Where is this training occurring? In 2050.
Yeah. In 2050, the seminaries, we've talked about this before. The seminaries are, in my view, as far as quality pastors and content go, are not going to be the places that are driving Bible church pastors in the future, particularly in 2050. It's going to be what we're kind of seeing happening here at Southwood, where we're going to have homegrown pastors that have been sitting under the teaching of the lead pastors in Bible churches and brought up to take the gauntlet on and take it into the future. In that Paul and Timothy model is I think where those pastors are going to come from in the future, if they will.
I think there's a bunch of things going on with this question that my mind's kind of traveling through. First of all, training should never be any different than it should always have been, the Timothy model. We call it seminary, which is good if it maintains that, but there still has to be a Paul involved, where there has to be prayer involved. Before you even came here, and then when we started talking and things like that, I was very much in prayer. One of the things I did tell you, I don't mind investing in you, but what's your plan for X amount of years before we even start that kind of thing? Because I think it's really good for me to have somebody that I can say, here's the pulpit and I trust, kind of thing. So training should start within the local body. There's nothing wrong with him or you, both of you are going to seminary, getting more information in and challenging yourself. Definitely. I should be easily I think what comes to my mind is the process. Training, and then having a church saying we need a pastor search committee, which is, to me, I'm going to say something and everybody out there's going to be upset, is the worst model anybody's ever come up with. No, and I am a product of a pastor search committee, because you're putting it in the hands of a bunch of lay people that really have no experience and no ability. They're going to give you a questionnaire, and that's what they're going to base their information on, or I really like him kind of thing. Where if I say, guys, 35 is a good time for me to move on or whatever it might be, but I'm going to stay here because I want to make sure this church and I still function, and he's going to be your next pastor. No search committee. And the idea of training is to have somebody automatically available that fits the model. Yep. People have heard the transition is easier because that keeps the stability of a church. You and I had a discussion the other day. If I die tomorrow, what's Southwood going to look like?
Specifically by getting hit by a bus.
We're talking about the way out.
The way out.
It's quick. But it would be so wonderful for the congregation, however big or small a congregation is if there's no transitional time.
Yeah.
There's no thinking about it.
I think it's interesting that you bring that up. Whenever I look at a church who has a pastor search committee, that's kind of a flag. That is not a healthy church, because there was no preparation for a succession in leadership.
Yeah, no internal development going on.
Right. And even if there is, because there has been models where a pastor search committee is a necessity, and there has been training, but the guy that's been trained is, I'm going to use a revelation term, is lukewarm. He's not really on the same par as the pastor, doesn't know how to teach. We'll get into this hopefully in other podcasts. What's his hermeneutic like? Mm-hmm. These kind of things. And, those kind of things play in. So when we talk about training, what specifically are we talking in the area of training? What are we looking for? Yeah. What is it our desire? And my desire at Southwood is to keep the same thing we've been doing, whoever's in the pulpit. So 25 years, we've maintained the same. Now, maintaining the same doesn't mean you're stagnant. You're keeping your priorities straight.
So it's values.
Right. Yeah. The values. Yes.
Yeah. Is it 2 Timothy 2:2?
Yes.
It's 2 Timothy 2:2 is the model that Paul institutes with Timothy is, and I've been taking our church through 1 Timothy, so I've been immersing myself in this context. And what I see and observe is Paul keeps bringing Timothy back to the root of the message. So there was this passing off from like initially with Jesus, right? The revelation to Paul from Jesus, right, in the wilderness, where he says, this is the doctrine. Hold to this. You got to protect this. And then you see another layer of that from Paul to Timothy, where it's like, I'm passing this to you. You got to hold to this. These are the doctrines of Christ. And then all the way to 2 Timothy 2:2, where then Timothy is charged on Paul's last leg of the race. He's charged to find himself people to pass it to.
But it's interesting. He says faithful men.
Faithful men.
Which is interesting, because that means we're talking about adjectives the last podcast. Yeah. Here's an adjective which is kind of interesting, because that means there are men in the church that are not faithful. Don't choose them. You're not going to get anything into them.
How do you measure faithfulness? That seems to indicate that there's already been a level of responsibility that they've been given to demonstrate faithfulness.
Plus, they've been given information that they've trusted. Yeah. So they've been given truth that they rely on, and you can see it.
What did they do with that?
Yes.
Yeah. What did they do with that? They've been interested.
So that they can be called faithful men. Yep. So I think that's kind of an interesting paradigm, because maybe some of those churches that have developed people that they think may be next up may not be the faithful men. Just my thinking. Yeah. That's all.
So you kind of derailed the track of our conversation.
Sorry.
You already brought up getting hit by a bus. Let's just go and
derailing. That's putting the bus on a rail.
let's deal with that. If your pastor was tragically taken today by a bus,
Yes.
is there someone to take his place? So let's bring this home to Southwood. What, you get hit by a bus going down to Lowe's?
Well, first of all, I am not walking anywhere anymore. And if you take me to Lowe's, I'll be in the back seat. No. But that's a good question, because I recently had a friend that passed away unexpected. How do we look at these things? We all have a time of death that only God knows. Prayerfully, this is already in place. Okay. Is Mike ready to be full-time pastor? Maybe not, but he can do certain things a pastor could do. God's put you in place to help him out with that. So at least we have a younger, much younger audience to kind of work with. And I think it's cool. I don't have a checkout date, but it's kind of interesting. My wife and I were talking the other day. Most of the men in my life that did not have longevity, except my grandfather, who smoked 100 packs of cigarettes a day.
So are you taking up smoking?
No, I can't even listen. Don't take this wrong, audience. The most offensive thing is somebody that looks like they're on fire. But we don't know what our endpoints are, which is kind of interesting, because we asked the question, what will the church be like in 25 years? But we can ask the individual viewer, what are you going to be like in 10? Because 10 goes like this.
Yep.
I mean, where are we individually? Where do we want to go? So when we talk about, is there someone to replace me? Yeah. And secondary, because I'm going him first, right? Secondary is not necessarily you, but there's other people that I have talked to that can at least fill for a while or help out until he's fully ready, because the church also has to support a pastor. And I hate to be like this. The church has to support a pastor. There's a lot of people out there that think, well, a pastor should always have a job. Well, I was bivocational for a while, and that's tough. It's really tough to be committed to teaching the Word of God as we do, and to still hold a full-time. And my job wasn't a 9 to 5 kind of job. It was 60 hours a week kind of thing. So it was tough. So I want the next person to come in, Mike, that says, I want to be full-time pastor, that they pay him appropriately, and, so those things have to always be in play. There's a lot of moving parts, but is there someone ready? In our case, yes.
Yeah. And I think that we are set up well because of the attentiveness to the reality that there will have to be a passing of the baton at some point. And so what we've been focusing on, I think the three of us, is just, there are certain things that we're holding to ensure that we protect. And that goes back to, I know that we'll do in the next podcast session that we'll do, right, on mission, vision, values.
Right.
Who are we as a church at Southwood? And there are certain things that our audience will hear in those mission, vision, and values that are who we are and what we are trying to protect. And so a lot of those values and aspects of the mission are kind of historical Southwood, like what you've been protecting, right? What, and with your tenure in the pulpit, and moving forward into the future, those are the things that we will also protect as well. So like just Andrew and myself, we put a lot of attentiveness and attention to making sure that those tenets of Southwood are protected. And those are important. Right from the text, but those are those core fundamental things that we can't move off of. And it
can always call them values,
but the core fundamental things, core values. There you go.
And with that being said, I don't want to really interrupt, but I just want to add this: is we're passing the baton to like-minded thinkers.
That's a good point.
That It's not like, he may have, or you may have, different styles of presenting the truth.
I don't think that's the case at all.
Their PowerPoints are more.
I strongly disagree with Andrew's sentiment.
No.
However, it's not, the change is going to be in the personality, maybe. The change is going to be in the presentation, maybe, but the material is going to still be the same. And the vision is going to be the same. So I think that's important when you say, is there someone to take the place?
Yeah.
Because again, people have bought in, the few people we have coming here, which is plenty so far that God wants, but they have agreed with what we're doing. So if we change that, there's going to be a flux in what happens. And I always like smooth transitions into whatever, whether it's management and work, or whether it's coaching in baseball or football or whatever. And church is much bigger than both of those. And to have the comfort zone of people knowing, well, we've known Mike for X amount of years. By the time, I'm not giving a number because I'm not going till whenever. but
open-ended statement there.
But I mean, so Mike's been here 10 years. Eric goes or Eric retires. The transition is easy because Mike's been here. Mike's done certain things. So the transition, it makes going or taking the baton to and someone replacing someone else so much easier.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. Instead of Cole bringing in somebody with the pastor search committee, and this guy's got, all these wonderful letters after his name, and he's written this many papers, and he comes up and he's stoic with, monotone and precise little PowerPoints, which is fine.
Are you talking about when you came and candidated?
No, I didn't do it for that. There was nothing like that. I was so different than anyway, but and which is interesting. Let's bring that up. What if we maintain the same old profile that would have been previously at Southwood or in any church? What profile do we want to carry on? And I think what happens is sometimes change is good, for the most respect. But then you set up something where someone may, in my case, may retire and stay in place, and there's going to always be, well, Pastor Eric's still here. What do we do? So the transition has to be, no, it's his. I'm helping him. I want to be, I guess in our case, Jack to you kind of thing,
a Jack.
But not.
There's only one.
There's only one Jack.
There's only Jack.
There's only Jack. So, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So transition, replacement, however you want to call it, to a different thing should be as smooth as possible, not only for the sake of the people, but there's an agreement here.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
And I want to just to button up on this question, because the original question that we're kind of hitting at here is what will happen if he goes, right? And we've said the bus.
Specifically
yes.
the bus.
The title of this podcast is The Buzz.
So kind of driving that to that question there, going back around to the Paul Timothy model and what we're doing is we have been setting ourselves up well by I hope that you would consider us faithful men.
Oh yeah.
And you hit on a really good point.
Yes. I put this down in oral agreement.
Is a point that you made earlier is what constitutes a faithful man, and how did Paul know that Timothy was a faithful man, and how is Timothy to know which men to pass the torch to later? And that comes down to content that has been entrusted to someone.
Yes.
Entrust these things is what the verse says. And so what we've been doing here at Southwood is you've been, which we really appreciate, is you have been giving us responsibility to entrust to us and letting us take that on and start to transition to, hey, we're going to be okay as a church long term because we are raising up the next generation of leaders for this church. And that's a model, going back to the original question, the first two, is that's a model that not a lot of Bible churches have done. Right. It's just been the old status quo. You've got the patriarchal pastor that's just been leading the church, and everyone looks to him. And honestly, even like MacArthur's church, where that's the guy. And so
I think there's also a fear from the lead pastor of competition. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, but some of these guys are so better entrenched in their position. I want to say something else, but in their position, that they don't want to let go of anything. And we're going back to the first podcast. What's the purpose of church? Whose church is this? It's not my church. I have said to people, I pastor Southwood, is my church. You understand? But it's not my church. I don't own it. I don't possess it. God's given me a gift to be the pastor of this church, and I hope to give the gift to the next guy, kind of thing.
I think that's really probably probably a good question or topic to end on is, how does a church deal with the issue of pasto-centrism?
Ooh, wow.
That's a big one.
Somehow I think that comes under personality disorder. And I'm not trying to be funny. I really think some guys love titles, you know, and I'm going to bring up Will. He'll probably watch this. Will hates to be called. Will doesn't want to be called a pastor. He's just Will. And I'm good with that. I still think I'm a pastor because there's a sign of respect there. But when does it go to your head? And when do you just say, hey, this is the position I hold within this congregation without the power struggle kind of thing? I believe the best way to look at a pastor is somebody that's going to a place that I want to go. So he's leading. And he's doing it by he's going to feed me the same way he's been fed so that I can get to the same. I like where he's going. I like what he's doing. I've watched him because the problem with being a pastor is you're overwatched, you know, or anybody usually in leadership at a church, which is not a problem. Watch. But am I going to a place you want to go? As your pastor. So with that being said, is there some meism involved? I think that's a good idea. And I try, I mean, I'm meticulous about meism. You know, I try to keep me out of it. I get me involved in sports. I do. You know, this is how I coach. Guys can't coach like me. I up you. You know, I ball. I'm going to take you to the tarmac because I can ball. You know, kind of thing. I'm good. But with a pastor, I'm God's instrument, and that's a mentality that's it's difficult to maintain. But some guys just can't do it because they like the pomp, I guess is the best way to say it.
Celebrityism, that sort of deal.
Yeah.
The personality.
Yeah.
You know, building your little kingdom.
Yeah. When Al Good was here, he was a great guy. He did a lot of publishing of books, editing stuff. And he said to me a number of times, you got to publish. You got to be out there. Somebody else in this congregation, I'm not going to name his name, has said it to me many times. Can I do it? Yeah. But what's the end? What am I doing it for? What's the end run? You know, I know you just had an article published. I think it's great, but why are we doing things? You know? So as a pastor and the next generation that comes in, and what I've seen in pastors is a lot of pastors are rear ends of a donkey. They just are. You go, you're not approachable. You think you're all this. Somebody will ask you a question. You blow them off because you say, you're just stupid. You don't know enough. And I'm going, that's not the approach. The approach is we have to be available. And sometimes you could preach, and I've done it hundreds of times, where I've preached a sermon for an hour and people come up with me with a question or something afterwards that has nothing to do with what I taught, which is usually pretty aggravating, right? But it's not, because people are curious. They're going to you for information, and you got to be accommodating. And you can say things like, we'll address this at another time, or someone give it to Andrew. We'll put it on a podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, the approachability and the humanity of a pastor still has to maintain. So when you talk about what's with pastors, sometimes they become too egocentric, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah, my comments on this is, you know, pasto-centrism is that a word?
It is
It is now. I was good. I almost sound well read.
Yes.
Almost.
Put it on,
Not quite, almost.
we could put it on Wikipedia and upload it. That's all.
I'll add it to the dictionary. Oh, my word document.
That's it.
It's now a word. But yeah, pasto-centrism, we're going to go with that. But in dealing with that, you know, it's, you guys have touched on kind of the what can lead to that, and the thought processes behind that. But really, the role of pastor, and I keep going back to that Paul Timothy model, is Paul understood that he was a steward. And he understood that the content that he was stewarding was important, and it was never about him. And when it came time for Paul's time to expire, and he was imprisoned in Rome, and he was about to have his head cut off, what was most important to him was the faithful student that he had would carry on that legacy. And the legacy wasn't about him. It was about the content of what he lived for. And that's kind of the most important aspect of just what we're doing with the organization of the church, like here at Southwood locally, and at large is it's not about like who wrote what book and who did the best sermon here. It's about, are we preserving the content, and are we making a stand for the truth and protecting these doctrines for future generations? And I think that we are doing a good job here at Southwood of holding that line with the development that's been happening with Andrew and I, and with you leading, and also allowing for us to assist in leading to where there can be that smooth transition. So,
okay. All right. Well, I think we hit some good questions. Again, the intent of this is to field questions from people at our church and whoever's listening. So send your questions in, podcast@southwoodbiblechurch.com.
All right.
That's good.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
All right.